I am Audrey, 33 years old, and I will never forget the moment I stood at my parents' front door on Christmas Day, holding a carefully wrapped gift in one arm and my homemade apple pie in the other. The scent of cinnamon and roasted turkey drifted through the air, and for a moment I allowed myself to hope just maybe this year would be different. I had spent weeks picking out personalized presents, planning every detail, even wearing my emerald green dress that always reminded my grandmother of the Irish roots she was so proud of. I stepped into the house, smiled politely, and waited to be greeted like the rest of the family. Instead, my mother breezed past me, muttering, "Just leave the pie in the kitchen." My father barely glanced up from carving the turkey. But what broke me was my older brother Lucas, who looked me straight in the eye, smirked, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "You can eat in the car. Why would we waste a seat on you?" The room fell silent, yet not one person spoke up. Not my sister Claire. Not my cousin Vanessa, who once stole from me and still wore my grandmother's locket around her neck. Not even my aunt, who I once lent money to during her divorce. Everyone turned away, or suddenly found their wine glasses very interesting. I looked toward the dining room. 10 seats, 12 people, my name card missing. Every chair filled by those who had excluded me all my life. I stood there, my hands trembling, but I refused to cry. Not this time. I walked over to the tree, placed my gift down, and made sure Lucas could see the tiny tag on top, "To Lucas, for all the things you think you got away with." He raised an eyebrow, confused. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Before you stuff your face, Lucas," I said, my voice calm, "check under your plate." Then I turned around, walked out of the house without another word, and shut the car door behind me. My heart was shattered, but my mind was clear. They had made their choice. Now it was my turn. I sat in the car, fingers frozen around the steering wheel, not from the cold, but from something deeper, years of humiliation finally snapping into sharp clarity. The windows of my childhood home glowed with golden warmth, silhouettes laughing over turkey and wine, and yet I had never felt more like a stranger. Lucas's voice echoed in my head. "Why would we waste a seat on you?" It was not the first time I had been pushed aside, but it was the first time I was not going to let it pass. The truth is, my family had always made sure I knew I was disposable. Growing up, I was the responsible one, honor roll, clean room, part-time jobs through high school, while Lucas coasted through life, leaving messes for others to clean. My parents never noticed. Or maybe they just did not care. When I got into architecture school with a partial scholarship, they told me it would be smarter to study nursing like Claire. When I graduated top of my class, Dad barely looked up from his phone. But Lucas got a car for flipping a rundown duplex with money he had borrowed from me. And when he defaulted on a loan, guess who they blamed? Me for not being supportive enough. The betrayal has always been wrapped in politeness. Backhanded compliments, jokes made at my expense, smiles that never reached their eyes. And every single time I walked away, I told myself, they are family. Let it go. Until tonight. Until the seat I was never given. Until that gift under the tree. Because that gift held everything: bank statements, texts, voicemails, photos. Proof. Years of evidence I had quietly gathered while they painted me as dramatic or ungrateful. It also held a notarized letter from my grandmother's attorney, the same grandmother whose locket Vanessa wore like a trophy. The letter confirmed the locket was mine. But it was never about the jewelry. It was about being seen. And they refused. So now I was done asking. I watched the frost form along the windshield and felt something strange, not sadness, not rage, but relief. I had spent years begging for crumbs from a table I helped build. Never again. From this moment forward, I would choose myself. If you have ever been pushed aside by the people who were supposed to love you most, I see you. And I want you to know, your silence does not make you weak. Sometimes silence is the loudest boundary you can set. If Audrey's story hit a nerve drop, a comment below, and subscribe to this channel. Your support fuels stories that need to be told. The drive home from that Christmas dinner, that wasn't felt like a funeral procession for every version of myself that had tried to earn their love. By the time I pulled into my apartment complex, the sky was ink black, my pie untouched in the passenger seat, and my chest hollowed out with the realization that I had never truly been part of that family table. I carried the pie inside anyway. I set it down, sliced a piece, and ate it standing over the kitchen sink. It tasted like cinnamon and ash, but I kept eating, because this time I would not let them take even that from me. That night, I laid everything out on my dining table, not just the copies of documents I had given Lucas, but the originals. My hands moved slowly, methodically, reviewing each piece I had collected over the last 6 years. Emails where Lucas lied to my parents about covering my rent, when in fact I had paid his mortgage for months. Voicemails where Mom called me exhausting. A signed letter from Grandma naming me the rightful heir to the silver locket, now warming Vanessa's neck like a badge of stolen honor. I remembered when Grandma slipped that locket into my hand during her last week at the hospice center. She had whispered, "They will try to take it. Do not let them erase you, Audrey." I had nodded, but I had not expected them to literally pry it from my jewelry box before the funeral reception was even over. That memory sat heavy in my chest as I pulled out the final piece, an audio file. It was from 2 Christmases ago. In it, Lucas laughed and said, "Audrey's so desperate for attention, she'd fake a breakdown to get out of buying gifts." My mother chuckled. Well, she always was a bit dramatic. It was not just what they had said, it was the comfort in their voices. Like betraying me was a family game, and I had been the only one who did not know the rules. That night, I did not cry. I wrote. I wrote down every moment I had gaslit myself into thinking I was the problem. I listed each betrayal. I printed the timeline. I created a file titled Inheritance Theft and Psychological Neglect. Audrey Parker. The truth would not set them free, but it would set me free. I emailed copies to my attorney and uploaded backups to the cloud. Then, I created a new email list labeled Release Recipients, Phase 2. Rachel, Alicia, Claire, my Uncle Mark, all the ones on the fence. It was time they knew the whole truth, not out of spite, out of clarity. I did not want revenge for the sake of revenge. I wanted accountability. And this time, I was no longer asking, I was delivering. The silence I left at the dinner table was only the beginning. Now the reckoning had a voice, and it was mine. 3 days after I sent the documents, I received the first reply, Rachel, Lucas's wife. Her message was only 2 lines. I had no idea. "I am so sorry, Audrey." That was it. No excuses, no defenses. But it was enough to confirm what I had suspected. She had not been entirely in the dark, just conditioned to stay quiet like the rest of them. Within hours, I saw the email had been forwarded. Claire opened it. Alicia opened it. Even my father opened it, though his response was silence, just like always. What I did not expect was a text from Vanessa. "I don't know what game you're playing, but this is beneath you." The locket was a gift. A gift from whom a ghost. I stared at her message, then scrolled back to the photo I had of my grandmother's handwriting. To Audrey. May this always remind you of how deeply you are loved. That did not sound like a hand-me-down to me. Vanessa's nerve would have made me laugh if I had not spent so many nights crying over exactly this kind of delusion. But the one that truly broke through the quiet came from Claire, my baby sister. She sent a voice memo, hesitating at first, then whispering, "I am so sorry I stayed quiet. I thought if I didn't get involved, they wouldn't turn on me too." She sounded like the girl I used to braid hair with, not the polished bridesmaid who stood beside Lucas while he made jokes at my expense last Thanksgiving. I replied with a simple message. "You can break the cycle, but I won't do it for you." The most shocking moment came 2 days later. Alicia showed up at my office unannounced. She looked thinner, paler, nervous, and in her hand was the locket. My locket. She handed it to me without a word, but her eyes said everything. "I am not ready to face the others," she whispered, "but I needed you to have this." I took it, fingers trembling, and for a moment the years of betrayal melted into something almost fragile. I thanked her, not for returning it, but for acknowledging I had never deserved to lose it in the first place. After Alicia left, I sat alone in the conference room and held the locket tight in my palm. I was not sure if the tears that followed were from grief, rage, or vindication. Maybe all three. But in that quiet space, I made a promise to myself, to Grandma, to every version of Audrey that had begged to be heard. I would not let them rewrite the narrative. This was no longer about fitting in. It was about taking back the pieces they had stolen and reassembling myself without shame. I knew more fallout was coming. Lucas would rage, my mother would spin, and my father would retreat into silence. But for the first time, I was ready. I was not the quiet sister. I was not the emotional one. I was the truth bearer. And the truth finally was loud. 2 days after Alicia returned the locket, my inbox exploded. Not with apologies, those were rare, but with desperation. Lucas's first email was pure venom disguised as concern. I do not know what you are trying to prove, Audrey, but you are tearing the family apart. Take it back before you ruin everything. His words hit with the same tone he had always used when we were kids, coded in control, laced with ego, never once questioning whether he might be the problem. I did not respond. Instead, I opened the private group thread I had created. Rachel, Alicia, Claire, Uncle Mark, Aunt Helen. People who were finally starting to see. I dropped a new file into the Drive audio from last year's Easter brunch, where Lucas admitted to forging Dad's signature to co-sign a loan on the lake house, the same one Dad later blamed me for convincing him to take. Truth had a weight, and I was letting it drop piece by piece. Rachel called me an hour later. She was crying. I believed him when he said you were unstable. I believed everything. Her voice cracked. I think I am married to someone I do not even know. I listened. I did not try to fix it for her. That was the old Audrey. The new me let silence hold the grief. The shift became real when Claire asked to meet in person. We sat at a coffee shop halfway between her home and mine. She looked exhausted, but there was no defensiveness in her eyes. Mom told me you chose to be distant, that you liked isolating yourself. I nearly laughed, but I held it in. And you believed her? I asked. She flinched. I did, she admitted, because it was easier than asking why she only ever set one place at the table for you. That line broke something in both of us. She started crying. So did I. Not because I was healed, but because she was finally bleeding truth instead of silence. Still, not everyone cracked. My mother sent a long letter in the mail, typed formal, and signed with her full name like I was some business liability. She blamed my vindictive behavior for turning the family into a fractured mess. She ended with, "We hope one day you will find peace and come back to us." There was no mention of the locket, no acknowledgement of the lies, just a thinly veiled demand to stop embarrassing them. I held the letter over the sink and lit a match, watched it curl blacken and vanish. That was my answer. I did not owe them a return. I owed myself freedom. And I was learning that peace does not come from being welcomed back to a broken table. It comes from building your own one seat at a time with people who see your worth without needing proof. The more they tried to silence me, the clearer my voice became. And now that I had spoken, there was no going back. The letter's ashes were still warm in the sink when my phone lit up with a message from Lucas. "You're making a fool of yourself. You think people care. You're the bitter one who never fit in." For a second, I almost deleted it. Then I opened the screenshot app and saved it to a new folder, retaliation. Let him keep talking. Every word he sent became another nail in the coffin of his own narrative. I no longer needed to convince anyone. The truth was out, and it was multiplying. By the end of the week, Rachel had moved in with her sister. Claire had gone no contact with our parents. Alicia was compiling her own file, uncovering the way Mom had manipulated her out of a trust left by their grandfather. And I was preparing for the next step, not just survival. Resolution. What they never saw coming was how deeply I planned. While they were calling me dramatic and ungrateful, I was talking to an attorney. My grandmother had not only left me the locket, she had also left a portion of her estate in a small family foundation. My name was on it, and in the paperwork buried in pages they never bothered to read was a clause. If any family member attempted to block or misappropriate inheritance intended for me, the foundation's assets could be redirected at my discretion to community causes or preservation grants. Lucas had tried to hide that. So had Mom. But they failed to read the footnotes. And I had read every word. I walked into the Foundation's downtown office in heels that clicked with intention and handed them the notarized documents. "I'd like to file a redirect," I said, sliding over the files. The administrator blinked. "You want to give it away?" I smiled. "I want to give it to people who never asked me to shrink myself." The news traveled faster than I expected. Lucas blew up my phone for 2 days straight. Mom left 3 voicemails, her voice cracking, not with remorse, but fury. "You're tearing the family apart over old wounds. You're turning into a stranger." But I was not turning into anyone new. I was finally becoming who I was always meant to be. That weekend, I hosted a dinner. Not in protest, but in peace. I invited Rachel, Claire, Alicia, Uncle Mark, a few friends from work, my therapist, Dr. Patel, even my neighbor, who always brought in my mail. We ate on mismatched chairs, passed wine around a modest table, and toasted to truths that no longer needed to hide. There were no speeches, no toasts to family values, just laughter, open arms, and the kind of silence that heals instead of wounds. As I cleared plates and refilled glasses, someone asked, "Do you miss them at all?" I paused, thinking of the seat they never set, the words they never took, back the woman they never really saw. "No," I said, because I was never really with them to begin with. These people, this table, this calm, was what I had been searching for all along. And the only thing I regretted was not walking away sooner. That dinner marked a quiet rebirth. As the laughter faded into the night and guests trickled out with hugs and promises to stay in touch, I stood alone in my kitchen hands, in soapy water, replaying the conversations that had unfolded over the evening. No one brought up the drama, no one pried, but I saw it in their eyes, the respect, the recognition, the acknowledgement I had begged for my entire life from the wrong people. Now I was standing in my own home, surrounded by warmth, not forced upon me through obligation, but earned through mutual care. It was the kind of night that made you grieve harder for what you never had. But life has a way of testing your boundaries, just when you think you have secured them. The very next morning, I received an email from a lawyer I did not recognize. It was a cease and desist order on behalf of Lucas. He was claiming emotional distress and reputational damage from the slander I had supposedly spread. The irony, most of what I had shared had come directly from his own words. I laughed out loud, the sound sharp and bitter, then forwarded the letter to my own attorney with a simple subject line: "They're still trying." I was not afraid. I was exhausted. And that was more dangerous. Fear kept you cautious. Exhaustion made you bold. My response was public. I posted a carefully worded letter on my personal blog, detailing my story, not with malice, but with facts. No names. Just moments. Betrayals. Documentation. I ended the post with a simple truth. Silence was loyalty they never earned. It went viral. Messages poured in. Strangers, former classmates, even distant relatives I had not spoken to in years reached out. Some with apologies. Some with their own stories of erasure, favoritism, and family gaslighting. But the most unexpected reply came from my father. He emailed me directly. No subject line. Just 5 words: "I did not know everything." That was it. Not an apology, not a request. Just uncertainty. It was the first time he had ever admitted to not being in control. And maybe that was something. Or maybe it was nothing. Still, the lines were shifting. Claire invited me to her wedding dress fitting. Rachel filed for divorce. Alicia sent me an old photo of Grandma and me in the garden, the silver locket glinting in the sun. "You were always hers," she wrote. "We just refused to see it." That one made me cry. And through it all, I held the line. I did not lash out. I did not beg them to change. I let them feel the weight of their choices while I reclaimed mine. This was not about revenge anymore. It was about rewriting the story in my own handwriting. No longer the black sheep, no longer the problem child. I was not the one who left the family. They were the ones who abandoned me long before I ever walked away. And now that I had built something of my own, I finally understood peace does not need permission. It just needs truth and a locked door behind you. The weeks that followed felt like walking through a house after the fire had been put out, quiet, smoky, and full of the sharp scent of things that would never be the same. The blog post had reached further than I ever imagined. Former teachers, old college roommates, even my childhood best friend, whom I had not spoken to in a decade, left messages like, "I always wondered why they treated you that way. And you were never the problem, Audrey." It was healing, yes, but also infuriating. Where were these voices when I was 12 and locked in my room while everyone else ate birthday cake? Where were they when I sat alone at Thanksgiving, watching my family toast to Lucas's resilience for recovering from mistakes he never paid for? Their silence had been a co-conspirator. And though I was grateful for their words, now part of me could not help but think, you all saw me drowning. And only now that I have learned to swim do you reach for my hand. Still, it was not validation I was after. It was acknowledgement. That came one cold Tuesday, when I bumped into my mother at the grocery store. I had not seen her in person since the Christmas incident. She stood frozen by the dairy case, her cart half filled with the same peppermint creamer she always hoarded in December. Her lips parted, but I said nothing. Just looked her in the eye and moved past her. And it was not dramatic. It was not cruel. It was survival. Because even in that small moment, I knew that if I let her speak, I might slip. I might fall back into the orbit of what if, and maybe this time. And I could not afford that, not after everything. What she did not know was that I had already started the paperwork to officially cut legal financial ties. I had quietly removed myself from the shared family trust that she and Lucas had managed for years. The money meant nothing to me anymore. What mattered was cutting every last thread of expectation. I signed the final page and mailed it with a shaking hand, but when I walked back to my car, I exhaled like someone who had been holding their breath for years. That document was not just legal, it was symbolic. I was no longer their fallback, no longer their scapegoat, no longer their emotional punching bag dressed in loyalty. Later that night, I lit a candle and placed the locket finally mine on my nightstand. I stared at it and whispered, "I kept my promise, Grandma." Because I had. I had not let them erase me. I had not let them twist my love into servitude. And I had not let bitterness win, even when it begged for a seat at the table they never set for me. This was not the happy ending I had once fantasized about, but it was real. And in its rawness, it was more powerful than any apology they were too proud to give. Some stories do not end with an apology. Some stories end with you standing in the mirror not to check your flaws, but to finally see your worth. That was me now. Weeks after mailing off the final documents, after deleting the last voicemail from Lucas, something about doing irreversible damage, I found myself staring at my reflection, not with judgment, but with quiet pride. I had spent years trying to shrink myself to fit into their idea of family. Now I was expanding. My space, my voice, my peace, none of it needed their permission anymore. It still hurt, of course. Healing was not some magical curtain that fell after confrontation. It came in waves. A song that reminded me of Grandma's garden. A whiff of peppermint that brought back winter mornings when I still believed love was unconditional. Some days I still grieved the family I never had. But those moments no longer drowned me. They passed like weather, and each time I remained standing. Claire called me last weekend. Her voice was steadier now, stronger. She told me she and Rachel had started a support group for women who had been emotionally neglected by their families. It started with just the two of us, she said. Now there are 12. I smiled through the lump in my throat. Even in my absence, something good was blooming from all the wreckage. I told her I was proud of her. And I meant it. Forgiveness, I was learning, did not always require reunion. Sometimes it simply meant letting people grow away from you. I returned the locket to my jewelry box, not to hide it, but because I no longer needed it to remind me who I was. I had that now etched into every decision I made, every wall I put up with love, instead of guilt, every step forward without looking back. The girl who once stood in the hallway, holding a pie and a wrapped gift waiting to be acknowledged, was gone. In her place stood a woman who no longer needed a seat at any table that required her silence as a price of admission. As spring approached, I planted a small garden on my balcony. Nothing extravagant, just lavender rosemary and a single climbing rose. I thought of Grandma. I thought of the legacy she left behind, not just money, not just a locket, but courage. And I vowed to pass it forward. So if you are listening to this and you have ever been made to feel like the outsider in your own family, know this: you are not alone and you are not broken. You do not have to keep proving your worth to people who benefit from your silence. You have every right to walk away and build a new kind of love, one that starts with you. If Audrey's story resonated with you, drop a comment below and hit subscribe. Your support helps us tell more stories that deserve to be heard.